There's a version of you that no one has met. Not because you're fake, not because you're manipulative, but because somewhere along the way, you learned that being fully seen is dangerous. You learned that if people saw the whole story, the doubts, the fears, the unfinished healing, the questions that keep you awake at 3017 a.m., they might step back. So you curated yourself. You became understandable, predictable, easy to love, and you called that connection. But it isn't connection. It's performance. There's a room inside you that stays locked. You visit it when you're alone, when your guard is down, when the silence is loud enough to make you honest. It's the room where you keep the mistakes you haven't forgiven yourself for, the times you failed someone, the insecurity that whispers you're not enough, the fear that one day they'll realize they could do better. You tell yourself you're protecting the relationship, but what you're really protecting is your image. And that image is exhausting to maintain, because real intimacy doesn't grow in curated light. It grows in the dark corners you're afraid to show. Have you ever noticed how relationships plateau? You get close. You share stories. You build routines. You laugh. You become part of each other's daily life. But something subtle remains untouched. There's a layer beneath the surface where your voice would shake if you spoke from it. Most couples never cross that threshold. They stay in comfortable closeness. They share schedules. They share beds. They share vacations. But they don't share the trembling truth, because the trembling truth risks everything. And here's the paradox no one teaches you. You cannot experience deep love while hiding the parts you fear make you unlovable. You can experience admiration. You can experience desire. You can experience companionship. But to be fully loved, you must be fully known. And being fully known feels like stepping into open air without knowing if someone will catch you. So you test them. You reveal small vulnerabilities first, safe ones. The kind that make you relatable, not risky. You say things like, I overthink sometimes. I'm not perfect. I've been hurt before. But those are surface confessions. The real ones sound like, I'm afraid I'll ruin this. I don't trust myself to stay steady. Sometimes I don't believe I deserve you. I don't know if I know how to love without losing myself. Those are the truths that change dynamics. And so you hold them, because you've survived by holding them. You built independence like armor. You learned early that needing someone gives them power. So you told yourself, I don't need anyone. You confused emotional distance with strength. You confused self-sufficiency with safety. But isolation doesn't build resilience. It builds loneliness disguised as pride. There's a difference between being strong and being defended. Strong says, I'm scared, but I'll speak. Defended says, I'm fine. Don't look deeper. And the defended version gets applause. The strong version risks rejection. Which one have you been choosing? Let's talk about what really happens when you confess something real. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just real. There's a moment after the words leave your mouth where time stretches. You become hyper-aware. You analyze their face, their breathing, their pause. You wonder, did I just say too much? Did I make this heavier? Did I ruin the illusion? Because confession dismantles illusion, and illusions are comfortable. But here's what most people misunderstand. The transformation doesn't happen when they respond. It happens when you speak, when you stop editing yourself, when you let the truth exist outside your chest instead of buried inside it. Psychologically, vulnerability activates fear centers in the brain. The amygdala lights up because exposure equals risk. But when vulnerability is met with acceptance, something powerful happens. Your nervous system rewires safety around honesty. You begin associating truth with connection instead of abandonment. That's how secure bonds are formed, not through perfection, through repeated moments of, I showed you something real, and you stayed. That's attachment. That's intimacy. But you can't experience that if you never risk the reveal. And here's the deeper layer. Sometimes we're not just afraid they'll leave, we're afraid they'll stay. Because if they stay after seeing everything, then you lose your excuse. You lose the narrative that says, they only love the polished version. You'd have to accept that maybe you are enough. And that's terrifying if you've built your identity around earning love instead of receiving it. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you let someone see you without composure, without answers, without strategy? We are masters of strategic vulnerability. We reveal pain in digestible portions. We cry gracefully. We explain our trauma like a TED Talk. We intellectualize our fears so they sound processed. But raw vulnerability is messy. It doesn't have structure. It stumbles. It contradicts itself. It admits confusion. It says, I don't know why I react this way. I'm still healing. I get scared when things feel too good. I push people away before they can leave. That level of honesty is rare because it removes control. And control feels safer than connection. But connection without vulnerability is just proximity. Two people standing close, but separated by invisible glass. You can touch hands. You can kiss. You can build a life. But that glass remains, and you feel it most at night, when the room is quiet, and you wonder if they know you, really know you, or just the version you curated. The most painful loneliness isn't being alone. It's being loved for who you're pretending to be. Because then every compliment feels slightly misplaced. Every reassurance feels conditional. Every, I love you, carries a silent question. Would you still say that if you knew everything? That question is heavy, and carrying it alone will exhaust you more than rejection ever could. You know what real strength is? Saying, this is where I'm uncertain. This is where I still doubt myself. This is where I need reassurance. Not in a needy way. Not in a demanding way. In an honest way. Because needing someone isn't weakness. It's biology. Humans are wired for co-regulation. Your nervous system literally calms down in the presence of safe connection. You are not meant to self-soothe everything. You are not meant to carry every fear alone. You were built for mutual vulnerability. But culture glorifies independence. It celebrates detachment. It applauds the one who walks away first. But walking away isn't power if you're running from exposure. Real power is staying present when your instinct is to retreat. Real power is saying, I'm afraid of losing you, without trying to sound cool, without minimizing it, without pretending you'd be fine either way. Because maybe you wouldn't be fine. Maybe losing them would hurt deeply. And admitting that is terrifying, but it's also honest. And honesty creates depth. Have you ever noticed that the most connected couples aren't the ones who never struggle? They're the ones who struggle transparently. They argue, but they explain. They fear, but they confess. They doubt, but they share. Transparency builds resilience. Secrecy builds distance. And distance grows quietly, not in explosions, but in hesitations, in deflections, in humor used to avoid depth, in, I'm fine, when you're not. That's how intimacy erodes. Not through betrayal, through withholding. You don't need a dramatic secret to feel disconnected. You just need unspoken truth. And the longer you hold it, the heavier it becomes. You start editing yourself mid-sentence. You avoid certain topics. You downplay your insecurities. You hide your triggers. And slowly, you build a relationship where you are almost known, almost loved, almost understood, but almost isn't enough. You feel it when conversations skim the surface. You feel it when something important happens, and you hesitate to share the full impact. You feel it when you want to say, I'm scared. But instead you say, I'm tired. Because tired is easier. Scared requires response, and response feels risky. But let's examine that risk. What is the worst case scenario? They see you differently. They decide it's too much. They step back. Yes, that's possible. But what's the alternative? You stay half seen, forever wondering, forever editing, forever protecting. That's a slow erosion of self. And that erosion is more painful than a clean break. Because at least rejection confirms reality. Half connection keeps you guessing. And guessing breeds anxiety. You deserve a love where you don't have to strategize your humanity, where your fears aren't liabilities, where your doubts aren't disqualifications, where your healing isn't a burden. But you cannot build that if you don't model it. If you want safe honesty, you must initiate honest safety. That means saying, I'm not done being afraid, but I'm speaking anyway. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action in the presence of it. And vulnerability is the highest form of relational courage, because it exposes the one thing you can't control, someone else's response. But here's a deeper truth. You can't control their response, but you can control your alignment. You can decide that living fully seen matters more than being comfortably hidden. You can decide that authenticity is worth the discomfort. You can decide that you would rather lose someone while being real than keep someone while pretending. And that decision changes you, even if nothing else changes, even if the relationship stays the same, because you stop betraying yourself. And self-betrayal is the most silent form of suffering. Every time you swallow truth to maintain peace, you fracture internally. Every time you minimize your fear to appear strong, you abandon a part of yourself. And over time, that abandonment becomes resentment. Not toward them, toward yourself. For not speaking, for not trusting, for not allowing the possibility of being fully accepted. You don't need to be flawless to be worthy. You need to be honest. Healing doesn't happen before connection. It happens within it. You don't become secure alone. You become secure through repeated experiences of, I showed up honestly, and I was met with care. That's how attachment heals. That's how intimacy deepens. So what happens after confession? At first, it feels like exposure, like standing in a storm without shelter. But then something subtle shifts. You realize you're still standing. The world didn't collapse. You didn't shatter. And if they hold your truth gently, something rewires inside you. You begin to trust not just them, but yourself, your capacity to be seen, your capacity to survive vulnerability, your capacity to love without armor. And that's freedom, not the freedom of independence, but the freedom of authenticity, the freedom of saying, this is me, without negotiation, without performance, without strategic editing. And if they choose you after that, you won't have to wonder anymore. You'll know. Because it won't be your curated self they love. It will be your whole self. The uncertain, the healing, the imperfect, the human. And that kind of love, it doesn't feel like adrenaline. It feels like home, not because it's flawless, but because it's real. So unlock the room. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if you're not done being afraid, because being fully seen is terrifying. But being almost known is lonelier. And you were not built for almost. You were built for depth, for truth, for connection that can hold your contradictions. Stop negotiating your worth. Stop protecting your image. Stop performing strength. Choose honesty. Choose exposure. Choose the risk of being loved for who you actually are. Because at the end of everything, that's what matters. Not how well you maintained control. Not how flawlessly you curated yourself. But whether you had the courage to open the door and let someone step inside. All of you. Not the polished version. Not the safe version. The real one. And trust that if they stay, it won't be because you performed perfectly. It will be because you were brave enough to be real. And real love can only grow in rooms that are unlocked. There's a moment in every relationship where you realize you're not scared of losing the person. You're scared of being fully seen by them. That's the part no one talks about. We say we want closeness. We say we want depth. We say we want someone who understands us. But when understanding requires exposure, when it requires us to remove the armor, we hesitate. Because being admired is easy. Being known is terrifying. Admiration lives on the surface. It applauds your strengths. It celebrates your confidence. It enjoys your stability. But being known means someone sees your contradictions. They see that you're strong and insecure, confident and doubtful, independent and quietly afraid of being left. And once someone sees that, you can't take it back. There's a version of you that functions beautifully in love. It communicates clearly. It stays calm during conflict. It shows up consistently. That version is impressive. But there's another version. The one that overthinks after arguments. The one that replays conversations at midnight. The one that sometimes pulls away not because it doesn't care, but because it cares too much. And that version doesn't get shown as often, because you learned early that emotional self-control equals safety. Maybe you grew up in a space where vulnerability wasn't welcomed. Maybe expressing fear was labeled weakness. Maybe you had to be the strong one. So you became good at holding things, holding your reactions, holding your tears, holding your questions, holding your need. And you convinced yourself that holding everything together made you lovable. But here's what nobody prepared you for. When you hold everything in, you also hold intimacy out. Because intimacy requires emotional risk. Not dramatic confessions, not grand gestures. Simple, uncomfortable honesty. Like saying, when you go quiet, I get scared. Or, when things feel too good, I start waiting for them to fall apart. Or, sometimes I don't feel worthy of how well you treat me. Those sentences don't sound powerful, but they are, because they remove the illusion of perfection. And perfection is what most people try to maintain in love. You don't want to seem needy. You don't want to seem insecure. You don't want to seem too much. So you regulate yourself into emotional minimalism. You share just enough to stay connected, but not enough to feel exposed. And at first, it works. The relationship feels smooth, stable, easy. But under the surface, something is missing, because ease without depth eventually becomes distance. You start to feel slightly unseen, not because they don't care, but because you haven't let them see everything. You've shown them the curated version, the emotionally intelligent version, the self-aware version. But you haven't shown them the raw version, the one that sometimes doesn't know why it reacts the way it does, the one that's still healing from things you don't talk about, the one that fears being fully chosen. That's the hidden layer. And hiding it feels safe until it feels lonely. There is a specific kind of loneliness that exists inside relationships. It's not loud. It doesn't come from conflict. It comes from restraint. from constantly editing yourself, from swallowing questions, from downplaying fears, from pretending you're unaffected when you're actually overwhelmed. You lie next to someone who loves you, and you think, if they knew how much I'm still figuring out, would they stay? That question creates distance, not because they're leaving, but because you're bracing. Bracing is exhausting. It's the subtle preparation for impact, the constant readiness for disappointment. And when you brace in love, you never fully relax into it. You enjoy it. You appreciate it. But you don't surrender to it, because surrender feels like loss of control, and control feels safer than vulnerability. But control doesn't build intimacy. It builds structure. Intimacy requires something riskier. It requires saying, I don't have this all figured out. I get afraid sometimes. I need reassurance more than I admit. And then allowing silence, allowing their response, allowing the unknown. That's where courage lies, not in confidence, in exposure. Psychologically, when you reveal something vulnerable, your brain interprets it as threat. You become hyper-aware. You scan for rejection. You prepare for withdrawal. But when that vulnerability is met with care, your nervous system recalibrates. You begin to associate honesty with safety instead of danger. That's how emotional security is built, not through grand romantic gestures, through repeated moments of, I showed you something fragile, and you handled it gently. That repetition changes everything. But you can't experience it if you never take the risk. And here's the deeper truth. Sometimes we don't share because we don't trust them. But sometimes we don't share because we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust that we're worthy of staying loved after being fully known. So we maintain the illusion. We keep performing competence. We keep performing calmness. We keep performing emotional maturity. And slowly, the performance becomes identity. You forget what it feels like to speak without calculation, to say what you actually mean instead of what sounds composed, to admit, I'm not okay right now, without explaining it perfectly. Have you ever noticed how we romanticize independence? We celebrate people who don't need anyone. We admire detachment. We praise emotional self-sufficiency. But needing someone isn't weakness. It's human. You were designed for connection. Your nervous system calms in the presence of safe attachment. Your brain releases oxytocin during emotional bonding. You are biologically wired for vulnerability, yet you've trained yourself out of it, because vulnerability has hurt before, because being honest has been used against you, because someone once saw your softness and mishandled it. So, now you protect it. And protection feels wise, until it starts blocking the very thing you crave. You want depth. But depth requires disclosure. You want security. But security requires exposure. You want unconditional love. But unconditional love cannot exist without unconditional visibility. You cannot be fully loved if you are partially known. That's the equation. And it's uncomfortable. Because being fully known removes your escape route. If someone sees everything and stays, you can no longer blame distance on misunderstanding. You have to accept that you are loved as you are. And if they leave, at least they left the real you, not the performance. There is something profoundly freeing about that. Rejection hurts. But being loved conditionally hurts longer. Being loved for a version of yourself you manufactured creates quiet anxiety. You constantly think, I have to maintain this. I can't fall apart. I can't be inconsistent. I can't show doubt, and that pressure builds resentment. Not toward them, toward yourself, because you know you're not being fully honest. And betrayal erodes self-respect. Every time you silence your fear to appear strong, You abandon a part of yourself. Every time you minimize your need for reassurance, you teach yourself that your needs are inconvenient. Over time, that becomes emotional isolation, even in love. So what does it look like to stop performing? It looks like this. You say what you actually feel, without polishing it, without packaging it perfectly, without turning it into something impressive. You say, I'm scared you'll see my flaws and change your mind. I don't always trust that I'm enough. I sometimes pull away because closeness overwhelms me. You say it plainly, and you let it exist between you. That's intimacy, not flawless harmony, not constant certainty, honest presence. And here's the most important part. Vulnerability doesn't guarantee closeness. It creates the possibility for it. The outcome isn't guaranteed, but growth is. Because even if the relationship changes, you will have practiced authenticity. You will have chosen alignment over image. You will have honored your internal truth instead of suppressing it. And that changes your relationship with yourself, which is where all secure love begins. You don't build strong relationships by hiding your cracks. You build them by allowing someone to see the cracks and still choose to build with you. Love isn't proven when things are easy. It's proven when the uncomfortable truth is spoken and connection remains. That's when you know it's real. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's resilient. So ask yourself, are you being loved? Or are you being performed? Are you being chosen? Or is the version you curated being chosen? And if it's the second one, are you willing to risk the first? Because that's the crossroads. Stay safe and slightly lonely, or risk exposure and experience depth. You don't need to confess something catastrophic. You just need to stop withholding the small honest things, the quiet fears, the subtle doubts, the unspoken needs. Because intimacy grows in small disclosures, in moments of, this is hard for me to say, followed by truth. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to be willing. Willing to tremble and speak anyway. Willing to be uncertain and present anyway. Willing to remove the armor and trust that if it breaks, at least it breaks honestly. Because real connection isn't built on who you wish you were. It's built on who you are right now. Still healing, still learning, still imperfect, and still worthy. Stop performing in love. Stop auditioning for acceptance. Stop managing your humanity to make yourself easier to keep. You are not a product. You are not a rade same. You are a person. And people are layered, contradictory, emotional, growing. Let yourself be that. Let yourself be seen without rehearsal. Let yourself admit you don't have it all together. Let someone love you without the costume, because that's where peace lives. Not in perfection, in permission. Permission to be fully human and fully known, and still chosen. That's the love you deserve. Not almost known, not almost understood, not almost safe, fully. And the only way to build that is to stop hiding and start speaking. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if you're still afraid, because courage in love isn't loud. It's honest.